Americans live lives of consumption, unaware of their contribution to the slow termination of our own planet.
It's time for change.
Let's talk about that. Hello, I'm Anthony Coviello.
I'm Alice Tibbetts.
And I'm Lucas Walsh.
And this is the Whole Story-Wahconah, where we are going to investigate and explore how the Industrial Revolution has shaped our world, and more importantly, how we should move forward. So I think before we can really get into this, we need to sort of have a brief recap on what the Industrial Revolution even was.
Of course. Basically, in the early 1800s in Great Britain, this sort of economical change occurred where machines were starting to be produced and now could be operated in factories, which would allow for mass production of materials and products. The main workforce was mostly farmers, so they were sent in, they had to move into the inner cities and such, and they worked in factories, and basically that became the most common job. Machines ran everything.
Yeah, it was just like the introduction of fossil fuels just like totally revolutionized Britain and then the rest of the world. So why is it that this segment of our history is so important? The Industrial Revolution is sort of essential to how modern society works now. It's the reason none of us have like the plague, and why we can take an aspirin when we had a headache, and it's the reason we can own multiple t-shirts and have multiple cars. It's structured jobs and the school system. But sadly, it's also the reason why when we go to the grocery store, most of the apples are from Guatemala instead of grown locally. And it's also the reason children in China take smog days instead of snow days. See, I think because of its significance to our history, a lot of people kind of overlook the bad things about the Industrial Revolution, like pollution, deforestation, world hunger, poor working conditions, and sort of like a unanimous depression. Like this introduction of fossil fuels is actually sort of a toxic cycle that we've all entered as a society and as like a nation. But right now we have an amazing special guest with us, our very own environmental science teacher, Miss Lesage, to tell us more about climate change.
Thank you so much for having me today.
Oh, we're glad to have you too, Miss Lesage. Okay, so the first question we have about the Industrial Revolution's effect on the environment is a pretty simple one. So for our listeners who aren't so familiar, in your simplest terms, what is climate change?
So climate change is something that happens over a long period of time, and it's not something that you can see in a season or 2 seasons. It's something that takes decades for you to be able to see the effects of climate change. And what that is, climate change is a gradual increase, or it could be a decrease in temperature over time, and it's a global change in temperature. So it's not just one specific area, it's the whole entire average global temperature that changes.
Okay.
Next question, what would you say are the 3 biggest causes of climate change?
So over time, there's been several reasons for climate change, and most of them have been without humans involved at all. So they've been natural reasons for climate change. In the past 250 to 300 years, we've seen climate change dramatically over time, and that's all because of humans. So I would say currently the 3 reasons for climate change right now is because of humans putting out fossil fuels. That's probably the biggest one. Fossil fuels and burning any sort of carbon and increasing the carbon in the atmosphere.
Miss Lesage, I just wanted to ask, so scientifically, what is it about fossil fuels and carbon dioxide that shifts the atmosphere?
Okay, so I don't know if you guys have heard of the greenhouse effect, or if you are in a parking lot on a warm day and you close the car and roll the windows up, how it gets really warm inside. That's because we have our layer of our atmosphere kind of acts like your car in the windows, where energy from the sun can come in, but it can't necessarily get out because of some of these carbon dioxide molecules that are increasingly being released into the atmosphere. So without the carbon dioxide molecules, or with a lower amount of carbon dioxide molecules, energy is able to come in and out of the atmosphere, and we have a really good balance. But because we're increasing the amount of carbon dioxide molecules, what's happening is that energy and the heat isn't able to be radiated into space, and it's actually being re-radiated back down into the earth.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah.
So we have this heat building up in our atmosphere and all that, and you commonly hear about Americans causing, a lot of fossil fuel burning and all that. So what exactly about the American way of life causes that?
So Americans make up about 5% of the world population, and we use 30% of the resources.
Wow.
And the use of resources is what actually lets out some of these fossil fuels and carbon dioxide and methane gases and all of those heat trapping gases that I was talking about earlier. So every time we use something, whether it's you buy a new cell phone or a new pair of jeans or new shoes, that process of making them and shipping them and you using them is contributing to the amount of heat trapping gases that are being released.
Ms. Lesage, do you think that we've hit a point of no return when it comes to the climate? Are we too far into this? Is the atmosphere, is it never going to return back to normal before this human destruction?
Well, we're all still alive, and we're all still here. And I think the problem is we have to look forward and think about what we can do for a sustainable future. And it doesn't necessarily mean that we have to, revert back to what life was like 300 years ago. But it does mean we have to make conscious decisions about our everyday life and how much we consume and what we consume. So I think that people might think we need some huge drastic changes. That would be great, but I think it also starts with just doing the little things that we can do to help reduce our carbon footprint.
So you're talking about how we can change our carbon footprint and how each individual person can change that and make it a little bit easier on the whole big picture, like a domino effect. But what would specifically be how we change it? How would we change our own carbon footprint and stuff like that?
So I think the patterns in what we consume. Something really easy that we can do is consume less. If you look inside of your closet, you probably have more than 5 pairs of shoes. I know some people have 30 pairs of shoes. And I don't think we need those. So just consuming less would definitely help. Another really easy thing we can do is just be conscious about where our food comes from. So food is, and what we eat is a big, huge carbon emitter. And when we think about, so if you have a pineapple for lunch, that pineapple comes from, say, Costa Rica or somewhere in Southern America. They have to grow it on a plantation and then fly it or ship it here. And then we have to store it. It would make a lot more sense for us to eat an apple that you went and picked in your backyard or at a local orchard. So just cutting down on where just being conscious about where you're eating from is another big, huge thing that you could do.
So that's something an individual can do. Are there any ideas you have, maybe something us as a group, as Americans, can do towards helping fix climate change?
I think I'd start with a quote for that, and the quote is, "Never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world. Indeed, it's the only thing that ever has." So I think that we have to start as a small group with all of these small little changes, and that's going to drive the bigger change.
So it'll add up in the end.
I'm hoping. And I think that it's a contagious thing. So if we start that and it's a way of life and it is how it is, I think that policy will eventually follow up with that kind of mentality.
So what do you think the overall consequences will be if there aren't enough small things, if it doesn't add up, and if it just keeps going like it does?
So I think that the climate change is real, and we've already seen a lot of the effects of climate change, the stronger storms and the droughts and the floods. And I think that's going to become more of a reality, and that's going to be life, and we're going to have huge consequences in our land, and the people will be affected by that. So I think the frequency of those things are definitely going to be increasing. And we're already starting to see some of the things that we're scared of happening.
Well, thank you, Miss Lesage. That was a really great quote you added there too. I definitely agree. So to conclude here this interview, is there anything you'd like to say to our listeners, sort of encourage them or empower them about how they can make a difference, what we should do?
I think I'll keep it really short and simple, and I want to just tell you to be the change, and that's what I would say to you.
Oh, that's lovely. Thank you so much, Miss Lesage.
Very good. Thank you for having me.
Now that we've seen the scientific side of things, how about we take a look at the economic side with our next guest, Mr. Kovacs.
Hi, Mr. Kovacs. How are you?
I'm doing very well. Thanks for having me.
Oh, yeah, of course. So, Mr. Kovacs, what do you teach here?
So I teach a bunch of subjects in social studies department. I teach a U.S. History 2 course. I teach 2 modern world history classes and also economics.
Wow.
So I have a full boat this year, yeah.
Wow. And you don't even have a classroom.
I don't. I'm a very rogue teacher, but I like it. I get to see everybody throughout the day and get my steps in. So it's hilarious how we're finally in this room making this work.
Oh, of course. That's what
you know,
yeah.
We had some loops or hoops to jump through, so I'm glad to be here. This is awesome.
like 6 cancellations and 4 different technical difficulties, and we're finally in this room together.
That could be a comment on our society, though, right? Everyone is so busy. We all have this stuff to do. We have jobs to work. We have work to do to get to the next level. It's a very busy day.
The level of stress that I reached because of such these small things is also kind of astounding and a little strange that I was so overwhelmed with this thing. But people are starving and the planet is declining and all these things.
Well, didn't we were trying to fix this
also
mic and
testimony to our modern society.
It is. I mean,
stressing overall.
I think we just labeled it as a first world problem, right?
Yeah.
I mean, there are people across this globe right now that they don't care about a mic not working. I mean, they're trying to get water, right? So.
Way to make me feel pretty awful,
No,
Mr. Kovacs.
it's the world we live in. I think that's the whole motto.
Okay, so we just had this interview with Miss Lesage where we talked about climate change and how our environment is shifting in the wrong direction, and I think in order to make positive sort of environmental changes, there needs to be some sort of social change. It has to be dependent on human behavior and in sort of economic structure. And since you are our economic teacher, I would like you to educate us.
No, definitely. Well, there's a strong link between history and economics. And I'm sure Mr. Patton taught you about the domestic system, life before industrial times, and how it was pretty simple. I mean, they had their hardships, and it was very difficult. But what really changed that was the steam engine. James Watt really patenting this idea and spreading it through cities. And it was that catalyst that really prompted society to say, hey, we have this factory system here. We can make a lot of products quicker. But the key question here is, we need people to work these jobs, to work these machines. They're not going to be in the countryside. They will be in the cities. So you have this mass urbanization, towards the early part of the 1800s that really changed our society to what it is today. It was a huge catalyst.
So you mentioned the production of a lot of products and all that, and of course they need ways to sell these various products. And you see on television and on the internet and any other kind of media you watch that there's constant bombardment of advertisements, with things like Black Friday and all that. It's always, buy with people. So how important is consuming and shopping to our economic system?
Oh, Lucas, that's a very, very good question.
Thank you.
So in part of our economics unit, when we do macroeconomics, we do talk about gross domestic product, GDP. When you're seniors, I can't wait to teach this to you because it's very, very interesting. But so the basic equation for gross domestic product is GDP equals consumption plus investment plus government purchases plus net trade. So, but the aspect for this question is consumption and how much of that is part of our overall production. Believe it or not, our nation's GDP or consumption rather, is near 70%.
What does that mean?
So for everything that we are producing in our nation,
okay,
most of it's going to our society consuming it. So in simple terms, we love our stuff. Okay, us as American society, like you said, we're bombarded by ads, Black Friday sales, buy this TV, buy this new video game console, bring your family here. We love our stuff. We love our phones. We love our gadgets. We love our clothing, our fashion design. And I really think that starts with industrialization. But to answer your question with economics, those two definitely go hand in hand. Does that answer your question?
Yes. Thank you.
So, speaking more on that and consuming, one of the ways Missile Safe said that we could stop climate change was by consuming less. And like, in terms of the global economy, specifically here in America, what would happen to like stock markets and stuff if we just stopped buying things?
So,
like, how much of it is centered on Americans going out and buying?
So to answer that question, a huge part of our system is based on credit. I read this really good book that Mr. Patton actually recommended. It was called *Sapiens* by historian Harari. And what he talks about is, in the middle part of the 1800s, the world established a system of credit. So in simple terms, you're borrowing with an end goal of having more in the future. So to get stuff in the future, we have to invest now. And what a lot of people don't realize is that when we're investing for retirement, when we are investing in the stock market, we're having this faith in the system in the future. So in terms of us solving this problem, I think that we're going to have a rude awakening in terms of us being happier with less. That's what I think it's going to come down to. How that's going to happen, I really don't know. I'm actually very fascinated, and we're trying to tackle that question in our class right now for economics. But I did bring a quote in I'd like to read. Is that okay?
Yeah, of course.
I'm actually very fascinated in this link with developed nations versus developing nations. And there's this kind of overall theme with developed nations trying to spread this idea of democracy and free market system to other nations who are trying to develop. And Harari asks, quote, "Ask a capitalist how to bring justice and political freedom to a place like Zimbabwe or Afghanistan, and you are likely to get a lecture on how economic affluence and a thriving middle class are essential for stable democratic institutions, and about the need, therefore, to inculcate Afghan tribesmen in the values of free enterprise, thrift, and self-reliance." So what I get from that, it's almost like a battle of ideologies that we're still facing today. And I know once you get to your imperialism unit and things of that nature, it's a reoccurring theme. It's not going anywhere. So it is very fascinating to me. It really is.
Yeah.
Okay, that's fantastic. And so I've read that book, and I think it's fantastic. I also think about that topic of we are so far we are successful. America is successful according to the books, and so we want to push that on to developing countries, and whether they want it or not, because we believe our culture is superior. But so do you think that this idea, so we're superior because of our economic, the exchange of money? Do you think that the desire to consume is influenced by our government? Do you think that that's...
Oh, most certainly.
Okay.
So, I mean, if you were to study U.S. history, it's a back and forth between the role of government, correct? Right?
Yeah.
So, do we want a completely laissez-faire free market system on one spectrum?
Yeah.
Or do we want to say, hey, government influence, government control, high priority, they're going to play a huge role. Mm-hmm. I think what we're finding now is that our elected leaders, President Trump, they're pushing for a more... free market principle, let the economy work on its own.
Pure capitalism,
hands off. And, I mean, there's a ton of historical trends that you're going to find out, like in the 80s with the New Right, under Reagan, that there are pros and cons to each, but it's going to be interesting to see where it goes. It really is. Personally, what I feel like, the government does need to have a check and balance on this free market.
All right, so... when we're talking about the Industrial Revolution and we're looking at how it happened, how everything advanced, is there any way that it could have happened differently, or did it need to happen the way it did for us to be where we are?
Oh, most certainly. Like I said earlier, politics and government provides the runway, if you will, for economics. Other countries are far behind. The Soviet Union, they were far behind for a long time. They were a communist nation. Before that, they were going through revolution. Even other nations, I mean, the Industrial Revolution started in Great Britain. It took time for that to spread to the rest of the Western nations. The Middle East, Asia, countries in those regions, they took a long time for them to modernize. And right now, you're going to find out in one of Mr. Patton's units about how China has modernized very quickly, and how we're very competitive now. We have a huge trade surplus with them. But to answer your question, I'm sorry I jumped around a little bit. That's a really tough question to answer. Could it have the what if question? Is that what you're asking?
Yeah.
I think if politics were different, it could have changed. I think in that time period for Great Britain, it made it so that it was a very nice setting for that. They did have political stability. They had an empire where they had resources and labor. And they had a lot of natural resources. So I call it the coal conundrum. We're still going through it now, right?
Yeah.
Where we have a lot of natural resources, but they are finite. They're limited. So that's where we're trying to get to renewables and things of that nature.
So you do mention that back then the Industrial Revolution helped give Britain political stability. And even nowadays it can be argued that our modern market helps give us more political stability than, say, if we were to stop buying. Because most assuredly, if people were to stop buying, things would change. In some ways good, yes, for the climate, but bad for the economy. Wouldn't you agree?
Oh, of course, yeah. I mean, but it's hard to generalize because there are people out there that do believe that less is more. I just had a wonderful group project on the minimalist movement where you've heard those tiny houses. You've heard
absolutely. I am all about the minimalist movement.
And my gut reaction to this is that no matter what, we do have limited resources, but we also have limited jobs. The job market is changing. So I think it's going to be a slow progress for people are going to realize that no matter what, less is going to have to be more. I mean, we're undergoing right now. There's a lot of people in this building that have to work multiple jobs. I mean, I work on weekends. It's a way in which that we prioritize our resources and also understand that there's going to be limitations. But also, the wealth inequality in this nation is huge. It's at the same numbers as it was in the 1920s, right before the Great Depression.
No way.
It is.
I did not know that.
Yeah.
Oh my God.
So it's about those same numbers. So the top 1% as opposed to the bottom percent. It's staggering, the statistic. I forget what the stat is, but I can bring it to you next time.
Yeah.
It's very interesting. And that goes along with your question with class dynamics. In the post-World War II, 50s, 60s, 70s, manufacturing was just a staple. Even here, for GE, Crane and Company. We're not seeing that as much anymore.
What are we seeing instead?
We're seeing we're in the digital age now. So, and I listened to another podcast about this. We're going to have to get along with machines as opposed to compete with them.
Yeah.
So they're going to have to be our friend. And I think that we're going to be, there's a huge job market for like education, for social emotional learning, for simply just getting along. I don't know what that's going to entail, but it's good. It's an interesting world we live in.
So you're talking about how we need to figure out if, we need to figure out that less is more, and we're going to move to that eventually.
Yeah.
Whether we like it or not, it's going to have to move to that.
Out of necessity, I think.
Yeah. If we look to like Northern European countries, that's happening. They're starting to think less is more, like in Finland and Netherlands, and it's kind of like the socialist type thing where less is more. But if we look to things like the Soviet Union, where it was a bigger country and a bigger economy that decided to say less is more, didn't really work out too well. Mm-hmm. And if we tried to figure that out here, how would that work out for us?
I still think we need to give people the element of choice. If you look at anyone embedded even in this school, we love our music. We love to wear what we want to wear. We love to choose what we want to choose. You will never be able to take that away from a country like ours. The problem lies, I think, it's the system of credit, I think it lies into what people are allowed to have. And it does rely on politics with, any kind of welfare system. We have to realize that, you're going to have to be able to deal with having less, but also be able to make that choice on your own. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
I think it's a balance.
It's a balance.
Involvement and like individuality and like making the decision.
Yeah. And I had grandparents that lived in a satellite nation in Hungary. Mm-hmm. And the first thing they noticed when they came here in their 20s was that you had freedom to choose things, what you eat. You're not having basic, meat and potatoes every night or a basic salad or something. You can go to a restaurant. You can have this type of clothing. The free market is all about choice, and consumers definitely dictate what those choices are, whether you like it or not. The fact that we buy iPhones on a regular basis makes Apple able to create more iPhones.
Yeah.
Right? We feed into that
circle
system.
into
Yes.
consumption. Yeah.
If you're talking about a communist nation, the government plans that for them. They allot you what you have, what you're doing, so you lose that choice. A final thought, I would argue, is that we need to have political stability before any kind of economics can be settled. That's what comes first, in my opinion. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does.
Okay.
Thank you for that final statement. Yeah. So, would you like to? We had Miss Lesage do this too. In terms, if you were just talking to a person, and so change needs to happen. That's sort of a thing that we have determined already in this podcast. So, what would you say to encourage change?
The first thing I would say is just be mindful and be slightly worldly, meaning pull up a newspaper and read about where something else is happening, what's going on. And you'll realize that some of the problems that you think are true problems, they're really not. There's a lot of instability and a lot of negative things going on in the world. And I think even at a micro level or macro level, if you're mindful of these things, it makes you kind of, wake up and smell the roses a little bit and kind of realize, all right, we can problem solve here. That's the biggest thing I see with our youth is just not being cynical and having them problem solve.
Yeah, that's exactly what happened earlier when we were having the technical issues in comparison to, say, problems.
It's a great example.
Yeah, in comparison to places where, there's starvation and disease and all sorts of terrible living conditions, you have people who are suffering on a daily basis to such great amounts that we never really see around here. Oh, yeah. Now, it does exist in America, but to a lesser extent. Yeah. And that's the exact thing here, is we act like a simple technical issue with a microphone. It's the end of the world, when in reality, it's kind of a blessing to think that's the awful problem. Yeah. Instead of having to worry about getting food. Yeah. And worrying about starving.
I would like to see a certain level of service learning occur in the school, which I think we're working towards. Just, do something for others, and it does wonders for you. It really does.
Yeah.
And, sorry. And that was the bell.
That was
thank
the bell.
You so much.
So can I have a pass to my next class? I really appreciate this. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. Yeah,
thank you for coming on, Mr. Kovacs.
Alright guys, I'm not gonna lie. This is we've been doing this for the past 6 weeks and my brain has just moved on. And this whole process, I've just forgotten everything I wanted to say, which makes it sort of unfortunate, but I think that's sort of a reflection on how our world works. I came up with all these great ideas about climate change and about economic change, but at the end of the day, all I care about is my chem test on Friday and knowing my grade on my English test. And I realized that that's sort of what we all do as humans, and that's why it's so hard to make change in America, is because at the end of the day, we all care about putting food on our table and a roof over our kids' heads. And I think that that's who we are. We're humans, survive and reproduce. That's what we're here to do. But
are you comparing putting food on the table to your chem test on Friday?
I'm comparing.
If you forgot, that is why we as humans have technology and, if not, pencil and paper to write your ideas down. So
see,
if
that's
you forget
the thing.
it, you look back.
The thing is, I was so into this weeks ago. I was this is so important. We're gonna make change with this podcast, and now, I've just forgotten everything, even though I did write it down. It doesn't mean anything to me anymore. And so, all this to say, I know I just trashed our whole thing. All this to say, I think in order to make change in America, our life needs to become less human-oriented and more about making change for the greater good. Because we've created a society that's all about us. You know what I mean?
Our society is us.
Yeah, okay, I get that, but
You're trying
it's not
to say,
just
let's
about...
make human society less human-oriented.
It's not just about us. It's about the planet. It's about future generations. You know what I mean? Okay, so if we're gonna help...
Future generations are human.
Okay, I get that.
It literally is about us.
Okay, so I get that, but it's not about you. It's not about me, Alice Garfield Tibbetts, or you, Anthony Coviello. It's just about just contributing good into our world, and not improving our own lives. And so I think we need to step out of our sort of selfish, me-oriented life, and sort of want to do well for others, including our great-grandchildren and including the planet. You know what I mean? I have to stop worrying about this chem test and start recycling. You know what I mean? I just think that nothing's going to happen if we're all, like, about ourselves.
Well, a lot of people do recycle. I think you need to come up with more creative ideas if you want to fix a problem like this that's been growing. Recycling's been a...
So recycling was just an example. That's not really what I hope to do. I do recycle, and I do it quite well. But that's...
Can you recycle bad? Like, you put it in a box and people take it away. It's like saying, I took out the trash bad today.
Okay, that's all I wanted to say, was that everyone listening, and to you two as well, think less about yourself and more about the greater good. So let's like get into this. So this is supposed to be the discussion portion, right? Mm-hmm. What do you guys think about government involvement? So let's just recap sort of what we're supposed to be covering. How the Industrial Revolution has shaped our world and how we should move forward, right? We've gotten, like, environmental information. We've got science from Ms. Lesage, and we've gotten the economic side from Mr. Kovacs. And he sort of mentioned that it should be a combination of government involvement and, like, individual choice. And so I'd like to know what you two think about that.
So there should be, like, 10% government involvement.
What does that mean? What would the government
do? It means, like, they should do almost nothing. Their requirements should only be on pure industrial factories. They should not infringe upon individual life, otherwise you are taking away freedoms that we value and we made a country on. People have to be able to make their own decision. So if, as a whole, society does not recycle and makes bad decisions, just recycling as an example, then that's their bad, but they had the choice to, because we're in a society where freedoms are valued.
But do you think if the government wasn't involved, people would actually choose to do good? Because, like I just said, all we care about is food on our table. We don't care about, like,
I feel like
some
people would. Some people would. Maybe not everybody.
I feel like a good chunk of people would.
You mean the liberals?
Not necessarily. I definitely think.
Would you two, if the government was not involved, and you two know what's happening to our planet. Miss Lesage told us. Have you made any changes post Miss Lesage interview?
I have not.
Exactly. Exactly. So
I also don't think that government involvement would change that. It would make me want to do more harm, because it would make me feel like they are trying to control me.
Yeah, I actually kind of agree with that. This is like a rare moment where I agree with anything
Coviello. One thing that...
Why is that relevant?
I think the 10% that I said the government should do is give opportunities. So
like what?
Government-funded recycling programs, or government-funded programs that help, but they are not forcing people to do it.
Yeah, I actually kind of agree with that. I think that if we like create a strike, if we like pass laws about like doing better for the environment, like people are just gonna rebel, because that's who we are. We just hate administration, and so I think you're right. I think it should be little government involvement. But the problem is, like what we just talked about, is that people. So my hope is that little government involvement and individuals make the choice to do good, but people aren't going to do it. Not everyone's going to do that, and so like I don't know how to create a choice or create the change within someone's mind, because that's not that's not my job.
Well, there's like a system with solar panels where if you install solar panels, you can produce electricity. That's what their purpose is, and if you produce excess electricity, power companies will buy that from you. So there's sort of a reward system for going green to a greater extent than you need to. Yeah,
so maybe that's it. Maybe we just need to like have instant rewards. Maybe the thought of doing good for the greater good of like the world and our future generations isn't enough for people to change their way of life. Maybe there needs to be some sort of like cash reward.
I don't think there needs to be full life changes. I think there needs to be changes to make the way of life that we currently have more renewable.
But I thought...
Because there are certain things where if going green is going to put me out of my way, I'm not going to do it because the other way is easier. So if you don't make easy renewable choices like available, I don't see why you choose it. So then you have to put it on the government for that 10% to make good ideas, and then people would, if they are easily accessible and they make it easier, choose them.
I completely disagree. I think that small individual changes aren't going to do anything. I think a small individual decision to do good will make a change, but like...
That wasn't a small individual change. That's a big change. I'm saying if you make choices, like, so if I said, you can take this test Friday,
okay,
or you can take 5 tests of the same one broken up on 5 separate days, you're probably going to choose that one because it's easier and it makes it smaller, shorter work for you.
Okay.
So you have to not only make renewable things possible for people to choose, but you have to make them easy and not strenuous so that they choose them.
I think you're kind of right. I think that just kind of discredited my whole plan, because I was thinking like big and radical, like third industrial revolution, like we would just shift our entire way of life immediately.
But that's not really the kind of thing you can just cause to happen.
I know. And so, like, obviously people will be resistant to that. I think you're right on that one. I think I was wrong. I just, for some reason, I imagined, like, a world of me's, and, like, I would be totally into this. But everyone else, not so much. Yeah, you're right. A big change is not gonna abide well with the rest of the country.
Change cannot happen quick. Change cannot happen instantly. It is a slow, over time process.
Gradual.
Which people that... You know what? I'm going to bring it to our modern election.
Oh my god.
People, when... You know, I'll even compare it to Obama. He said change.
My man.
And people expected it instantly.
Okay.
And it didn't happen. Didn't even happen over 8 years fully. Change is not instant. And it will never be instant. It has to be over time, otherwise there will be much more hurt in other areas where you're not changing.
Well, yeah, like if it's
so let's say if right now the government passed something that said it is illegal to drive gas-powered cars, everyone needs to drive electric cars, and if you're driving a gas-powered car, you will be fined. So now imagine every single person in America has to go out and buy a $50,000 electric car.
Yeah.
And if they don't, they'll be fined every single time they're in their car on the road.
That's
if you make change instant, it hurts more than it helps.
But, so we're making small changes right now. I mean, we have, like, the Green Umbrella Club in our school. Like, is this...
Okay, Green Umbrella Club in our school. Nothing against that, but that's not changing a big... So you just
said you didn't want big change.
Not big change. You need small pictures that change the big... Small changes that change the big picture. So I don't see how a club at a school is going to change the big picture. It's not. It's going to give someone a period to learn about it.
And learn about it, and then make change.
But where are there opportunities to make change in the real world?
And you think that opportunities should be government?
Exactly.
Okay.
Government provided. Okay. Not recommended, provided.
But, you know, that's never going to happen with our current administration. He's never going to provide us with opportunities to make...
I don't see why not. He is not...
Because he doesn't think climate change is real.
I also going to say he.
You refer to him as he's some sort of, like omnipotent power, just he...
There are many,
we are
many
talking
people in the
about
government that work it, and I do not think that Trump would be against it.
What?
If you showed...
What?
If you showed that it was possible to change it, add to jobs, and increase business while adding money to the U.S. surplus, there's nothing... I don't see a reason why he would, because
he doesn't believe in climate change, and also his people who voted for him don't either.
He is a businessman.
Okay.
His cabinet does not believe in climate change, but he is a businessman, and if you bring up numbers and money and show that it would work, I don't see why he wouldn't.
So, who is going to make this plan for President Trump?
You'd have to come up with that. You find someone, pick someone. Tell them to draft something that could be heard.
Okay, I actually think that's kind of reasonable. But I also
But
think
if he says no, modern society can't throw a hissy fit.
What do you mean? You expect us not to rebel?
So if someone comes up with an idea and proposes it to him, and they say no, and they give reasons, and then I say, well, that's not fair, and I start going out into inner cities and breaking windows and smashing cars and lighting fires, why?
I sort of agree that violent protest isn't super effective, but I also believe that it's our right as humans to stand up for what we believe in, and if we're opposed to something, that we should protest.
So I think we've come to the conclusion that big, radical, immediate change could not be successful because of the mass shock and anger that would occur. We've also determined that there should be more opportunities within society to make positive changes just on a moderate scale.
Okay, guys, I think we have one final topic to cover in our discussion period, and it's sort of a wrap-up, because we've sort of covered everything and anything that So our sort of purpose of this podcast is to discuss how the Industrial Revolution has shaped our world and how we should move forward.
Well, basically, our entire modern economy, the way it is thanks to that.
I think everything pretty much the way it is.
Yeah, really.
Even basic things are now starting to...
This whole process wouldn't be possible without machines.
Yeah, so machines, the introduction of fossil fuels, jobs, schools, this factory-oriented way of life, that was all caused by the Industrial Revolution. I think also something that I believe that's not really quantifiable that was caused by the Industrial Revolution was this sort of mindset and this sort of mentality. Like, we sort of became Americans in that, like, we believe in factories and we believe in, like, the American dream. Do you know what I mean? Like our grandparents, like they sort of made a frame for what life should look like. I believe. And so I think that's, in my mind, that's the biggest way we need to change, is we need to not be stuck in the past. You know what I mean? I think we're so, culture and tradition is so important to us that we're not willing to change. Even
I think they had it pretty right.
Well,
they gave a basic frame. They didn't give specifics.
That's true.
It's kind of like the founders. Like, when they made the Constitution, there's so much within it. Where, like, why do we have Second Amendment rights? Well, if you look in the first, paragraph, it's in case the government becomes too powerful, we can overthrow them. They planned for that. Or the way they planned the American dream to look is that anyone from any social class can work hard enough to become successful and get better classes.
I guess you're right. I was focusing more on, the fact that, industrialization is bad for the environment, and that's sort of one of the things that they implemented when the Industrial Revolution was happening. And so we need to be able to be accepting of change and be willing to make.
At the same time, we should be mindful of change, because while it's good to keep progressing and advancing with things,
you want to make sure you
don't want to be
too much down.
Yeah, don't be making change just for the sake of making change, because that's going to result in really bad, poorly thought out change that'll be worse than what.
Yeah, as long as it's positive. I think. And
Palestine.
God. Okay. So that sort of covers how we should move forward. So we should move forward with awareness. You know what I mean? Like, we should be aware of what we're doing and its effect on the future. I do this thing where I every time I'm about to make a big decision, I think about my 5-year / 10-year plan. I think about the choice I'm about to make and what it'll look like in 5 or 10 years. Yeah. And I think that's sort of what we should do as a country, is adopt my my decision making methods. So that's, I think we should all be aware and mindful of what we're doing in terms of our effect on the environment and in terms of our opportunities to make change.
Yeah, and I think there should be a balance between the two sides. As Mr. Kovacs explained to us, that if we focus too much on the environment, that could really hurt the economy, and then you won't be able to keep supplying things like solar panels because you just won't have the money to make them if the economy crashes.
That is true. You're right. I don't think about that often. I think I have this the environment's the only thing we need to focus on. The economy will work itself out. But I think you're right. I think that people's lives are...
But I think that's something slow change will help, is because both sides can kind of shift in a direction forward, so nothing should really fall apart if it happens slowly.
So in a concluding statement, the Industrial Revolution has shaped everything, and the way we should move forward is with accepting minds.
Yes.
Yep.
Okay.
And be more mindful of what we do, both economically and environmentally.
Yeah, so I think I'd like to end this wonderful podcast of ours with a quote from JFK. So it has to do with change too. So the one unchangeable certainty is that nothing is unchangeable or certain, and I think that speaks well to what we were just talking about. How like this way of life created by the Industrial Revolution isn't definite, and that we should get out of the past and decide our own future.
Yeah.
That was empowering, guys. Okay. So that is it for us here at this podcast. But we would like to thank many people.
Yes, so first of all, we'd like to thank Mr. Abuse. He is the band teacher here at Wahconah. He also has control over many things such as microphones and even these practice rooms that we have recorded in. And if we didn't have access to those things, this would be completely impossible, or at least it would definitely be harder to do and probably worse.
And Mr. Abuse has saved our lives 10 billion times. Every time we have a technical difficulty, I go running to Mr. Abuse and he fixes it for us. So we'd really, really like to thank him. We'd also like to thank Mr. Kovacs and Miss Lesage for being our guest stars. We really appreciated what they had to say. I think what Miss Lesage said about global warming was really important. I think everyone should be aware of that stuff. And Mr. Kovacs sort of included a layer of complexity about the economy and what would happen. We'd also like to thank Mr. Patton, our history teacher, for allowing us to do this project and allowing us to take 3.5 months to complete this project. So thank you for that. And I personally would like to thank you two, and I know that it's a little cheesy, but what the listeners don't know is that although this podcast is serious and to the point, there was a lot of ridiculous laughter that happened in this practice room, and I am really, really thankful for that. And I know that it seemed like it was a lot of me talking and me controlling, but you guys are really important to this process, and I cannot tell you how much I've enjoyed spending time with you.
Yeah, you said 3.5 months. What's like the monthly rate? It's like $20 a month, so it's like...
Oh, man.
It's like $70. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Hey,
I'm not going to start paying you guys.
Hey, Mr. Patton, that's $210.
Oh, God. We really should start collecting those, shouldn't we?
Okay, on that fun note, this has been... What is the name of this podcast again?
It's The Whole Story.
This has been The Whole Story-Wahconah. We hope to see you next time. Have a lovely rest of your life.
You want to redo that last part?
Yes, I do.
Top of the morning to you, laddies!